you think about what makes salespeople, let me rephrase that, high achieving salespeople good at their job is their ability to get their way. Like if you want to boil it down to its most basic essential element, it's their ability to get their way. Well, then they come to our building and they want to get their way with the sales manager. They want to get their way with the data entry people. They want to get their way with accounting. They want their stuff pushed to the front. And so I think one of the challenges is how do we direct that without squelching that, like without beating down their spirit or changing who they are. And in an effort to gain compliance, we lose some of their effectiveness.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. I'm joined today by Randy Anderson. Randy is an entrepreneur, a dynamic trainer, and an extremely popular speaker at HR conferences across the country. His work focuses on helping people become more engaged in their work, better equipped to do it, and empowered to live a more fulfilling and influential life. Randy is co-founder of E3 Professional Trainers, a training firm that provides workplace and life training for individuals, teams, and companies. And like me, Randy will be a speaker at the HR Southwest Conference from October 13th through the 16th right here in Fort Worth. You can register for my favorite conference of the year at hrsouthwest.com. Welcome back to Good Morning HR, Randy.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much, Mike.
So I'm having you on today to talk about managing sales teams because I think there's in the organization, there are few departments that are more the bane of the existence of HR people than the sales team.
I would agree.
And in a lot of the organizations I've worked with over the years, the sales team seems to operate so differently than the more operational transactional groups.
Right.
So what makes managing a sales team so different than an accounting or a service delivery team?
Yeah. So let me start by saying, let me throw myself into the guilty pile. So I was a salesperson. I was a sales manager. So I did not come up. A lot of people come up into the training world through HR. I came up through sales management. Before I left that world, I was doing a tremendous amount of training within our organization, which is what led me to doing what I'm doing now. So everything I'll say, I'm not the guy who's standing on the outside, saying everybody else is wrong. I'm one of the perpetrators. Okay. So
you're just not throwing stones.
Right. And I just, I feel like it's probably important to look at it that way because I know firsthand how we can be. And I know firsthand how hard it can be to manage those folks. And I do think it is often managed differently, especially if you've got people who are straight commission or some variation thereof, that they kind of come and go as they please. People don't know if they're taking long lunches or playing golf. They don't know if they had a breakfast or if they just got up late. And so I think that there's a lot of frustration that can come with that. And the metrics are very cut and dried in sales. You either made the sale or you didn't. In other departments, there's a whole lot more ambiguity, and that's probably not the right word, but there's a whole lot more subjectivity to judging whether somebody did their job correctly or not. And so I do think that it is often managed differently. I think it's sometimes the excuses come around differently, and therefore the accountability can appear different to people who are in other departments. I fully agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, accounting, payroll goes out on time.
Right.
AR, what's our days to receive and things like that versus sales. Well, the customer's always about to make the decision, right? It's always, you can always kick that road down a little bit, can down the road a little bit.
Yeah. And, and I look at it and I people who are not in sales sometimes don't understand the sales cycle. That, okay, I'm in a building time as opposed to a reaping time. We're in a slow time of the year where we're building for annual contracts for next year. We're at a end of the year cycle where we're just trying to get as much, I used to have, I adamantly disagreed with this philosophy, but he would do fire sales, the last few days of the month, just throw it all on a huge discount. And so I'm managing against my manager on that
Right.
sense, and trying to, my people want me to cut the price because it makes it easier to sell. And so there's just a lot of dynamics that people in other areas, and at the end of my time in sales management, I was not only managing salespeople, I had data entry, I had engineering, I had marketing, I had the creative department, I had the receptionist, I had the accounting. And so I saw all of those personalities in the same melting pot. And it can, you think it's challenging to parent siblings. It's very similar. And you've got different personalities and different stages of life depending on their ages, but nobody wants to take anybody else's peripheral factors into consideration. They, it's I do a lot of time management training, that. And I
Right.
talk about it a lot. You don't look as busy as I feel. So you don't look like you're having to work as hard as I'm working in my cubicle because you're gone all the time. Well, yeah, follow me around all day and watch me get my teeth kicked in by frustrated, clients, or by people who don't want to buy from me and they feel like I'm bothering them until they actually do decide to buy, and see if my job looks so easy. But it looks glamorous because we get the lunches and the golf and the swag and we get invited to the client's Christmas party, and, accounting's not getting that.
Right. Well, and you said their main metric is that revenue number, and I think that's right. But I think one of the things in some organizations, because they don't have great sales management that's integrated with the rest of what the organization is trying to do, sometimes sales gets a bad rap because somebody on the team makes promises to clients that operations can't deliver.
Oh,
And I think that's the other big metric,
crazy
right?
talk. Nobody would ever do that.
No, no, of course not. Yeah. So what, when you're talking about sales management, what's really involved? I mean, is it just looking at those revenue numbers, or what else does if I'm looking at a sales manager, what am I really looking at?
Yeah, so let me answer from what I did. And I'm saying this for the sake of my credibility, not for the sake of my ego, okay? I never managed an operation that didn't have significant gains. And so I was managing for growth, not managing to maintain, and several, all but, trying to make sure I'm saying an accurate statement there, all but two of the things that I managed were at a point in that organization's maturation or that organization's existence where they were poised for growth. I had two that they were not going to have that kind of exponential growth. It's just the way that they were. And so, a couple of things about that is, number one, I almost always had a developmental team member. They were new, they were developing new accounts, they weren't going to get the existing, the easy, the low-hanging fruit. And so I'm managing that person for a longer-term strategic approach as opposed to a transactional approach. I wanted it to be more relational. Building a relationship takes time, especially when you're building a relationship, asking people to spend money, asking people to entrust you with a part of their business, whatever it is you're selling. If it's a business to business, you're asking them to entrust you with a portion or a part of their operation. And so there's a lot of trust building that goes in there. Another thing is, you think about what makes salespeople, let me rephrase that, high achieving salespeople good at their job is their ability to get their way. Like if you want to boil it down to its most basic essential element, it's their ability to get their way. Well, then they come to our building and they want to get their way with the sales manager. They want to get their way with the data entry people. They want to get their way with accounting. They want their stuff pushed to the front. And so I think one of the challenges is, how do we direct that without squelching that, like without beating down their spirit or changing who they are? And in an effort to gain compliance, we lose some of their effectiveness. And I think great sales managers, that's part of what they do well, is to get them to buy into, quote unquote, the program, whether that be a system or a process or policies and procedures or accounting system or whatever it is, deadlines, thoroughness, accuracy, all those things that salespeople get frustrated by, to get them to understand, we want to help you sell. We are not here to make your life worse. And if we're going at it all the time, then that can end up being the big problem instead of a problem. It becomes the problem. And so an effective sales manager, I think, can kind of draw other departments around to really truly be a support staff and not be an adversarial relationship there.
Yeah, it's interesting because I see it from both sides. I have friends who have been in sales their entire career, and some of them change jobs fairly frequently. They're always chasing the next dollar, and but they're always complaining about how much paperwork this company's putting on them. Oh, they're making me fill out the CRM every time I talk to a client, and they're making me do all, keep all these notes and do all this. And I've got my paper and pen system that I use, and that's what works. And they're killing me over here. And then I talk to my entrepreneur friends who own their businesses, and they're pulling their hair out because they can't get their, so a prospect calls in that somebody's been talking to, and they go into CRM and there's nothing there, and they're mad because now I can't help this client because I don't have the information.
Well, and then suddenly I've got two salespeople in my office fighting for the account, the one who had it written on paper and the one who entered it into the system. Mm-hmm. And I've had that, and again, they all want to get their way. When they leave my office, no matter what I decide, one of them's mad at me.
That's you can't, and you just there's got to be a system, but you've got to kind of, I guess, make that system work.
Well, and
for the person you're hiring, right?
I think the sales manager has got to sell that mindset to the salespeople. They've got to sell that mentality of, look, number one, and this is a hard thing for sales. They hate this even more than paperwork. This is not your account. This is our organization's account that you have stewardship over right now. And if for whatever reason you win the lottery, you get run over by a train, or your cousin-in-law starts a business and hires you, we still are going to need that information about that customer in order for us to be able to serve that customer effectively. And there may be times when you have COVID or you're out of the country on a cruise and we can't reach you, and we need to do something for the customer. If you haven't left us a trail of breadcrumbs, we don't know where to follow that. And so I think sales managers, again, to some degree, I'm not going to say most of the time, but I will say often, they try to cram the CRM down their throat instead of letting them see why it can be a tool. It becomes a restrictive necessity. And I'm like, why not why did you spend all this money on? Well, we think it's going to help our sales grow. And we think okay, sell them on that. Don't just say, by God, you're not getting your mileage check if you don't fill out your CRM information.
Yeah, and I think salespeople, most sales profiles, seem to be really highly motivated by incentive and immediate reward and that money, and or whatever it is that they're looking for. And so, if you can incentivize what they're asking for, you can get what you want out of them as a way of helping them see how it's going to help them get what they want. That would be the way to do it.
Yeah, I think again, I look at it and I'm like, okay, so are we looking at transactional? Are we looking at the next 20 or 30 minutes? Are we looking at the next 20 or 30 months? Because if I'm looking at the next 20 or 30 minutes, well, I could go out and make a sales call. Right. Okay. I'm not going to argue with you about that. You're exactly right. But I look at it and I think, okay, but 20 or 30 months from now, when you've gathered all this data and you're remembering to send a birthday card and you're remembering to send an anniversary card and you're remembering to say happy first anniversary of when you first did business with us, and we know what their preferences are and we remember what we've pitched to them that they didn't like, but I've done 40 other pitches on that same topic and I couldn't remember if I showed this to them or not. That's when they'll begin to see how this is going to help them build their own business and grow their own commission. It's just like everything. I got to show it what's in it for them, right? This can't just be about compliance, or we're going to get a half-hearted effort at best.
So what does a sales manager look like? I mean, we always, it's almost a drinking game on the show here because we have somebody who's really good at a certain role, and so we make them a manager.
Right.
And but it seems like the attention to detail, the process orientation, those things that you want a sales manager to implement, and many times are contrary to what your really good salespeople naturally do.
Can be. I mean, yeah. I mean, I could argue both sides of that deal, really, and I, it kind of depends on if you're in a very transactional industry. People are going to buy something today, whether they buy it from you or somebody else.
Commodity type business.
Versus, I'm looking who I want to enter into a relationship with for a long period of time. Mm-hmm. I dropped my car off earlier to get worked on because my battery was dead this morning. I jumped it, started it. An hour later, it didn't start again. So I got something bigger than just the light was on. I trust them completely. I've been going to them for 15 years is different than I need to go buy a pack of gum.
Right.
And so if I've got a sales manager who's in a wrong fit, it may not be a personality mismatch, and it might not even be a business philosophy mindset as much as it is just a methodology mindset. And I used to work for a guy when I first got, well, I'll say I first got, it was probably my third real job out of college. I was mid-20s. He would come in at like 5:15 in the morning. And on paper, we didn't open until 8:30. Well, I was lucky to get there at 8:29. My brain doesn't work till 10, so I would do paperwork and stuff early. And then when my brain woke up, I'd go out and make sales calls. It drove him nuts. He wanted me to meet people in the parking lot when they were unlocking the door. And when he finally left me alone, when my numbers went up.
Right.
So he had to realize what was a personal preference for him was not necessarily a best practice for the industry. And so I would resist the statement that you made that started this portion of the conversation, because I think we can adapt to that. I just think we've got to and I think there's times you put somebody in a managerial role over a group that's maybe already been there, or they went from one of the group to the manager. Those same people who have been there may not be there 2 years from now. I mean, and that's a little bit like a coaching staff change, or a staff, a pastor changes at a church, and maybe the same ministers aren't there a few years from now. I think to some degree there's got to be some level of consistency in how we view how to build this business and how we're going to go about that.
And I think a big part of that is, okay, so we've got this excellent salesperson who we're going to move into the sales management role, because that's what they want.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's the only reason we're going to do it. We're not going to force somebody into
Right.
that, hold a gun to their head.
Right.
But then we got to do training. And I think sales management training is probably very different than sales training. I know it is. And it's a different kind of management than your frontline operations management. So, I know you guys do a lot of sales training, but I think it's not going to be a training function that most companies have already built into their organization, unless they've got a big sales organization.
Right. I would agree with that. And I would almost say it's a subset in there. I mean, they need the management training and the coaching training and the how to do effective performance appraisals and how to do, full engagement, employee engagement. But then they also need, how do we do tracking and account development and sales rep development, sales training, stuff like that. So I would say they have to have additional training, not necessarily different training. They've got to have additional training that maybe some others don't need to have. And, it took me, I've been in the business world a long time. It took me a long time to figure out there's more than one way to do accounting. There's different accounting philosophies, the same way there are different sales management philosophies. And so, I understand exactly what you're talking about. And my presentation at HR Southwest is going to be managing high maintenance, high performers. Well, I can have a high performing sales manager that is high maintenance. It's not just high maintenance salespeople. It may be high maintenance sales managers who are convinced the whole rest of the organization revolves around sales. And while that to some degree may be true, because nothing starts until a sale is made. You hear that adage before. Right. But if everybody's already ticked off at the sales department or the sales manager when the sale is made, they can sure put a grinding halt on things after that. And I always say that to sales. I'll go into an organization and they'll say, we've got 100 employees. I said, okay, how many salespeople do you have? 8. I said, okay, you got 8 people that can go find business, but you've got 100 that can lose it for you. And we've just got to understand that our internal customer service is going to have a whole lot to do with how they treat the sales department and how they help in the sales process, which is, it's back end stuff. I understand that. We're not, the accounting department is not what's making the customer say yes. But I've had customers say, I'm not doing business with you anymore because you keep sending me a wrong statement every month.
Right.
It's a pretty minute thing, but they just drove them crazy. And they said, if you do it one more time, we're not doing business. Sure enough, next month, the same statement goes out with that credit from 2 years ago that was supposed to go away and, whatever it is. So,
well, you mentioned your presentation at HR Southwest about managing high maintenance, high performers. With regard to sales, or just generally, give us the high points of that. What's the secret that you see to managing those high maintenance people? You need them to produce, and either they're prima donnas or they're just bulls in a china shop. And
Again, that would never
how do you
happen,
do
would it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can have a bull in a china shop who's in accounting. I can have a bull in a china shop who's
Right.
in marketing. I can have a bull in a china shop who's in engineering. So yeah, I mean, and this is something I deal with a lot with my clients to try to help them with. You know, when you look at this, I think my company is E3 Professional Trainers, and as you said in the introduction, that's engaging, equipping, and empowering employees. But 19 years ago, when I started this, that was teaching the essential elements of excellence for work and life. And so I would boil it down to the most. Think about PowerPoint for Dummies, Microsoft for Dummies, Excel for Dummies. Anything that has in my world that has E3 of fill in the blank, essential elements of effective coaching, essential elements of effective leadership, essential elements of effective communication. I think we've got to boil it down to its most base part. So number one, is it a personality deal, or is this really a person who's difficult to get along with? I didn't know until this morning. I was trying to think of a way to package this very simply for your show. You know the word perpetrator. So you would think there would be a perpetration, but perpetration is not a word, but I'm going to make up a word. On HR Southwest, we're going to make up a word here. What is the perpetration? Is it just that they're grumpy? Is it that they're not doing policies and procedures? I got to know what that is. Number two, what's their production? I mean, are they producing something that we could not easily replace? How do their peers feel about them? So the other people in their immediate team, and then what is the peripheral damage? You know, what are they doing at other parts of the organization? And so we're going to talk about that in my presentation and kind of see, we can't just look at this and say, oh, it's going to be easy. We can have a conversation with them and tell them what they're doing wrong, and that's going to fix it. This is going to be a process where we're trying to help somebody either add tools to their toolbox or, you know, get the vinegar out of the cookies, whatever it is. Hey, you're doing great, but, you know, it doesn't take very much vinegar and chocolate chip cookies to ruin that recipe. And so that's kind of where we're going to focus on in my presentation that day.
Yeah, and I've encountered it, and I in my presentation talking about values as an organizational accountability tool, you know, I use the example of that high-performing salesperson who brings in the bacon, who, you know, makes the revenue, but is a bull in a china shop the rest of the time. And if that person with that behavior continues to be incentivized to do that behavior,
Right,
and is rewarded for that behavior, it seems like they're rewarded for that behavior because nobody's stopping them and they're succeeding, then what does it tell the rest of the organization about the values of you can see what the company values. The company values revenue over everything else in this case.
Yeah, I would agree, but I just want to make sure everybody understands in my presentation, we're not going to just talk about sales, because I've seen extraordinarily creative people in marketing that thinks they can do no wrong. I've worked with a business manager one time who we referred to their office as the business prevention office because they made it so hard. This can be in any area.
Oh, sure.
And I think, but what I do think is the contributors, not the symptoms, but the contributors to it are pretty similar, whether they're in sales or accounting or engineering or marketing or whatever the case may be. And so somebody may say, well, you know, I'm in a nonprofit. Okay, just because you don't have a sales department doesn't mean you may not have a high maintenance, high performer. And in my presentation, it's going to be delivered in a way where whether it's a salesperson or somewhere else, they could apply those strategies to address this in an effective way. Again, without, I don't want to, step on the person. I don't need to beat them down to get them to do what I want them to do. I just got to help them to see the benefit of playing well in the sandbox internally as well as externally, because they're not going to treat their best clients that way. You know,
right.
They have the ability to play well in a sandbox because they're not going to treat external people that way.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 165 and enter the keyword SALES. That's SALES. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, on September 18th, I'll be hosting a free webinar entitled Increasing Productivity with Generative AI. In this 1-hour presentation, I'll demonstrate my favorite generative AI tools, ChatGPT, Midjourney, Perplexity, and others, with practical examples of how business leaders can prudently implement them to increase productivity. This free webinar is pre-approved for 1 hour of recertification credit from HRCI and SHRM. You can register for this webinar, or if you're listening after September 18th, watch the recording for credit at comparativeinfo.com/webinars. And now back to my conversation with Randy Anderson. Let's talk about a few more things that HR may not really understand about sales in general.
Okay.
Most organizations have some sort of sales playbook. And I think when that topic comes up, you see a lot of glazed eyes in other parts of the organization.
Yeah.
What's the sales playbook and whatever you want, whatever you call it in your model. And how do you hire somebody's, a candidate's, how do you match their style to your organization's style of sales?
Well, I think it's important, number one, go and look and see what they've sold. Go and look and see where they've sold. Go and see, if you can, without putting them in a bad situation, talk to some of their clients and just see, how they go about that. I think it's important to have really well thought out questions, because if I say, hey, Mike, do you believe in pushing a hard sell approach? I mean, because we really have a short time on, then you're going to nod your head and say, yes, absolutely.
Right.
But if I say, tell me kind of how you like to develop business and where your greatest strength lies. And if they say it's in a transactional approach and you want a relational approach, they may be a great salesman, but may not be a great fit for your organization.
Right. Selling commodities is often fast, hard, best price, let's get it out the door, versus a technical sale or an HR selling into HR. I've done it, and you've done it. I've done it my most of my career now, and just because I've gotten so old. But the reality is that's a relationship sale.
Right.
We're usually the most expensive background screening option our clients have. I mean, I think we're the best, but it's not until they trust me that they're going to, even have a conversation with me about spending more money on their background checks.
And that was where I always leaned in the way that I did business and the way that I wanted to teach my people how to do business. So to find somebody like that, it may take a little longer, and it may take, I need a pulse in this chair right now, but do I really want to be looking for a new pulse 3 or 6 months from now?
And spend all the time and money managing that other pulse out.
Managing it and then training the new person, onboarding and all that. And so, I probably was not good at the hire slow, fire fast. I hired very slow, but I also fired even slower. I was convinced I could train anybody into success, and there's just some people in the wrong job. But I do think that finding somebody who will approach business in a way that parallels with what your business philosophy is going to create a much less contentious relationship internally, and probably long-term is going to make other people in your organization want to help make them successful rather than to become a roadblock for them.
So let's talk about that last piece of HR that always comes up, comp. How do you think the best way to use compensation to incentivize a salesperson is?
Well, I mean, it's hard to get away from straight commission. Now, how you decide the commission is different. And there's got to be a consideration on cost of sales. We can't afford to pay more than X% of our revenue out in sales. And the bigger the ticket item, the more you can pay on that kind of thing. If you've got salespeople, I've had people before who were on some sort of a base salary, and it is amazing how content people can get. Let me rephrase that. It is amazing how complacent they can become. And, so if I put them on a straight commission system, number one, they know at the end of every sales call, they know at the end of every day how much money they just made. And, if I've got them on a base of some sort, that the only time I would lean toward that direction is if they've got some amount of other duties. So let's say that they're mentoring a new salesperson, or we're asking them to take on, let's say we've got a member of our sales team and they're going to specialize in cultivating new business. Well, number one, we know that's going to take longer. Number two, we know they're probably not going to spend as much money as an existing account that's been built up over time. So maybe maybe I supplement them a little bit with that. I've never been big on a draw and, reverse draws, and I've seen everything in the world. And to me, that just gets convoluted. I used to love it when I got to the end of the day and thought, okay, I made this much money today. I could go home and tell my wife takes care. I always laugh. We've been married 30 years 2 weeks ago, and I've always laughed that I'm responsible for revenue and she's responsible for her expenses. She does all the bill paying and all the everything. And any given day, I could go home and go, here's how much money we made today. Here's where we are.
And I think I agree with you about the direct, straight commission stuff, but finding, how often do you find salespeople who are really willing to do that? My argument's always been, if they're not willing to do it, and maybe, like you said, we spend time letting them ramp up, learn the product, build some relationships. But at some point, if they're not willing to really let it ride, I'm willing to, suffer or benefit based on my success.
Yeah.
Then I've always questioned, is this really somebody? Because you see salespeople out there asking $100,000, $150,000 a year plus a commission, and I'm like, you're going to have to pull in so much money to make that happen.
Yeah, I lost money in my sales career because I was so risk averse, and I was on a ramp up deal, and their deal was whenever you decide you want to switch over to commission, switch over. Well, I was so pessimistic and I was so risk averse. I'm like, let's just go one more month. Let's just go one more month. And I made the mistake after I finally switched over of going back and figuring out how much money I lost by waiting. And I promised I would never do that again, because I did lose quite a bit of money because of my need for security, my scarcity mentality. I'm very self-aware. I mean, it sounds a little surprising for a guy who does some motivational speaking. I don't do a lot, but I do some beyond training. And I do have a scarcity mentality. I know that I'm a realist leaning toward pessimism. My wife says I'm a pessimist just trying to make myself feel better. I know I want that security, but if I got somebody who is confident in their ability to sell and believes in their product, we're not going to have any problem making them some money. I may have to help them with organization. I may have to help them with time management. I may have to help them with PowerPoint so that they can do a more effective presentation, but I'm not going to have to help them with initiative and hunger. What is the Patrick Lencioni deal? Hungry, humble, and what's the third on the hiring the ideal team member? If you got a salesperson that's hungry, the commission won't scare them.
Interesting. And good luck finding a salesperson who's humble. But yeah.
I have known a few. Known a few.
Well, hey, man, I really appreciate you joining us today, Randy.
I look forward to seeing you at HR Southwest. It's like you said, I hesitate to say this in case somebody from somewhere else gets their feelings hurt, but it is probably my favorite conference that I speak at every year, and I'm looking forward to being there this year.
And you can catch Randy and dozens of other amazing speakers at HR Southwest right here in beautiful Fort Worth on October 13th through the 16th. More information is available at hrsouthwest.com. And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.